Chapter 8. The Voice. Brock peered at the switch, examining it from every angle. Then he tossed it back to me. I slipped it into the rear pocket of my dirty khakis. "Are you keeping it?" asked Wisteria. I shook my head. "Nah, I'll throw it away. Somewhere else. Don't want to pick it up again. Detector might... on the detector." Brock continued to sweep. Wisteria was digging around in a tiny purse that I hadn't previously noticed her carrying, some sort of beaded, antique-looking thing, finally emerging with a battered pack of cigarettes and silver Zippo lighter. She lit one of the crumpled white sticks and inhaled. I, hadn't really pegged you as a, I stumbled. "A smoker?" She smiled. "Well, I'm happy that I can surprise." She passed me the lit cig, holding it daintily between the very tips of her fingers. I accepted it and took a drag. "Bleh," I said, and gave it back. She laughed. "It's a bad habit. Don't start." "I won't." She took another long draw on the cigarette. "I don't care what the anti-tobacco people say, though. Smoking isn't beautiful. Smoking isn't glamorous." "Ha! It does look beautiful and classy. I look like Marlene Dietrich in Touch of Evil." "If you say so." "Also, it evens out my moods." "Your moods?" Brock had moved off toward one corner of the house near a tall, weedy patch. He stopped sweeping and called, "Zane, you're up again." I waved him off. "You go ahead," I yelled back. "I'll dig." I turned back to Wisteria, who exhaled a thick stream of smoke. "Doesn't it look amazing the way it stretches and rolls? Mysterious. Like it's alive," she said. I didn't see it that way exactly, but I didn't say so. "So, how many costumes? Outfits? Whatever." I motioned to her morning dress. "Lots. Pioneer dresses, flapper dresses, a poodle skirt." "Where does one get a hold of an authentic poodle skirt?" She smiled. "Well, I don't know how authentic it is. I get them from antique stores, or my mom makes them." I nodded. "Nice." "Yes, it's like her hobby. She makes costumes for a local theater company sometimes, or for those murder mystery dinner parties." Brock was whining in the distance. "Zane, get over here." I jogged over to Brock's mark and dug up an old Coke tab, which I stuck into my pocket with the switch. "This is boring," Wisteria said. "Let's go in the house." Brock wiped the sweat from his face. "Sounds good to me, man." We approached the old place with trepidation. It was in bad shape, though some of the unique architectural flourishes were still plainly visible. A long strip of wood detailing ran the length of the porch beneath the gutter, like a tiny fence with intricately lathed rails, a few flakes of light blue paint clinging tenaciously. Above the half-open entrance was a wide, rectangular transom window made of small colored panes. Incredibly, all the glass was still intact. Brock pushed the door open with the toe of his hiking boot. The interior of the house was well lit. Tall windows, extending nearly floor to ceiling, illuminated multiple holes in the walls where wood slats could be seen behind crumbling plaster. We gathered inside the front room and drank everything in. The ceilings were tall, much taller than those of modern homes. I'd guess they were about 12 feet high. Piled in three of the corners were pyramids made of beer cans. In the center of the front room, constructed from modern, unfinished 2x4s, was a long table bolted to the floor. Across the room, a dry erase board had been nailed crookedly to the wall between two windows, at the top of which, in marker, someone had written, "Beer Pong Registration," in bubble letters. 8 names were scribbled alongside a tournament bracket. Brock swiped his index finger through a layer of dust on the particle board beer pong tabletop, near a surprisingly detailed drawing of an erect penis. "I don't think this is an original feature of the house," he said. "Yeah, this stuff wasn't here the last time I visited," Wisteria said. We continued deeper into the house, passing through a kitchen nearly ankle-deep in garbage. Broken glass, old CD jewel cases, plastic solvent bottles, and the remains of a twisted Venetian blind cracked beneath my feet as I approached the kitchen cabinets. I opened each one in turn, empty but for a layer of grime. Brock and Wisteria went on ahead, while I poked my head into an adjoining bathroom. The vanity had been pulled from the wall and lay overturned on the lime-green, 70s-era vinyl flooring. The toilet, or at least the toilet seat, was almost new. It was faux wood, of a style popular during the early 90s. On the wall above it, the men's room poet had struck again. Haikus are the best. Sometimes they don't make sense, though. Colonoscopy? Below that, in a different hand, someone had written, I always wanted to write some words of wisdom on a bathroom wall. I hear you, I thought to the graffiti artist. I always kind of wanted to leave my mark as well. What that mark might be, I had no idea. Across the hall, I found a small dining room through an archway, more tall windows. In a far corner, a splintered wooden table slouched, coated in a fine layer of plaster dust from a large hole in the ceiling. I stared at the table for a long moment, trying to picture a family once sitting around it, eating dinner together. A calmness descended over me. My mind went blank. Cecil Everett pulled his chair closer to the dining room table, strategically positioning his newspaper within the dusty beam of sunlight streaming through the window. His wife stood in the archway, just staring at him with dark, hard eyes for what seemed like a full minute. A few circles of crimson blood dotted the front of her green and white striped dress. Cecil could feel the force of her gaze, yet he made an obvious effort to ignore it, idly turning a page. Little Jack sat in the corner, pushing his metal toy tractor back and forth across the bare wooden floor, making noises, and running over a plastic pig. Wendy Everett finally spoke. You need to go upstairs and see what you've done. You can't keep ignoring this. Cecil grunted. I can, as a matter of fact. Everyone knows something is wrong. The neighbors, they're going to get the police, and they're going to come in here. And they're not just going to take Carrie either. They're going to take all of us away. God is watching over us, said Cecil. He continued to stare through the newspaper, but his wife could detect the fearful vibrato in his voice. The distant sound of Brock and Wisteria's talking pulled me back out of my imagination. What an odd, vivid daydream. Where did that come from? How do you get upstairs? I asked aloud. Wisteria called to me from another room. In here. I followed the sound of her voice into what I assumed was a living room area, one that was almost free of garbage. The walls were still brown-stained and filthy, and every electrical outlet and light switch cover had been removed. Long vertical gashes were torn into the plaster. Somebody's ripped out all the wiring for the copper, Brock said. The two tall windows didn't admit much light. This side of the house was shaded by overgrown vegetation. In a far corner of the room, a narrow staircase rose 3 steps to a landing, turned, and presumably continued upward. Wisteria poked Brock in the ribs. You go first, she said. Brock shrugged. I'm not scared. He started up the stairs. Wisteria and I followed cautiously behind. It felt a little claustrophobic. The walls were only a few feet apart here, wide enough to touch with my elbows if I stood with arms akimbo. It was dark in there, too. Even less of the sunlight from outside was filtering into the enclosed stairwell. I could hear wood creaking and see the steps sagging under Brock's weight as he ascended. I don't want to say that Brock was fat necessarily, but he was definitely on the chubbier side. Watch those steps, I called to Brock. Test them first to make sure they aren't rotted out. Brock reached the second floor. Anything up there? Well, most of the floor is gone. It's just 2x4s. There's a big hole in the ceiling. I can see the sky. Any bloodstains on the walls? I called. Nope. Ghosts? Spirits? Specters? Brock shook his head. How about corpses? Wisteria asked. Nah. Looks like it was just a couple of bedrooms. One of them was painted bright pink. That's disappointing, I said. Wisteria dug a ballpoint out of her beaded purse and handed it to me. Well, sir, I think we should commemorate this momentous occasion for any other explorers who might pass this way. I wasn't much for tagging while I was out doing my explorations, but for some reason I still said sure. The wall by the landing where we stood was bumpy from cracked paint and weathering, so the writing took some effort. I scratched in the date, 4/21/01. Then I started in on my name. Brock turned and descended a single step. Then a voice. Get out. I was focused on making an artistic-looking Z, so it took me a split second to register the sound that I heard, but when I did, my body dumped adrenaline straight into my heart, like wading chest-deep into an icy pool. It hadn't come from any direction in particular. It was a male's voice, firm, but not shouting. It wasn't Wisteria. I knew Brock's voice. It wasn't him. My pen stopped in mid-stroke. I was still bent over, frozen, my hand to the wall. I looked at Wisteria, and she cocked her head, straining to hear. Her mouth hung open slightly. I didn't want to ask. I really didn't want to know the answer, and I could hardly force out the words. Did you hear that? I hissed at Wisteria. She nodded. We got out. In an explosion of movement, I turned and jumped down 3 stairs to the first floor. The floorboards gave a mighty groan and crack when I landed hard, but held out. I ran unthinking through the living room, tried to cut a turn too sharply and hit the door frame. I spun, pain shooting through my shoulder. Behind me, I saw Wisteria, holding her dress up, darting through the other door into a back hallway. Brock was pounding down the stairs behind us. I couldn't see him. I heard a shout. I could hardly think of anything but escape. The floor was so rotten here. A brief image of me turning my ankle flashed through my mind. To my right, a window with no frame or glass, my best option. I jumped through it, dropping 5 feet or so to the ground outside. My legs buckled and I rolled through the weeds. It knocked the wind out of me. Brock, I croaked. I could hear more shouting from somewhere. I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring my throbbing shoulder, and thrashed through the weeds to the front of the house, turning back only briefly to make sure that nothing was following me. Brock and Wisteria were standing near the truck. Brock started laughing when he saw me come stumbling out of the undergrowth into the light. Zane, what the hell was that? Wait, I know what you're going to say, I said between gasps for breath. Don't say anything. I had a first-year psychology class. I know all about, mass hysteria and the power of suggestion and all that. I pointed to Wisteria. What did you hear? Whispered in my ear. Wisteria bent down and did so, cupping her hand around my ear to prevent Brock from overhearing. Then it was Brock's turn. He whispered a phrase into my other ear. Okay, I said. Okay. I was still trying to process everything. Okay, what? Said Brock. We all heard somebody say, get out. I bent over, bracing my hands on my knees, and tried to catch my breath. I was replaying the sound of the voice in my mind over and over, but the pain in my shoulder suddenly came flooding back and made it difficult to think about anything else. I knew that suggestion might cause our memories to meld. If one person said they heard something, another person might start remembering it that way too, even if it was completely different than what was actually said. Now, however, I was completely certain that this wasn't a case of simple suggestion. Brock didn't know what Wisteria heard, and Wisteria didn't know what Brock heard. Yet they both heard the same thing independently, and both Brock and Wisteria heard the same thing as me. I looked up, lost. Brock was watching the dark windows of the house's second floor, straining to catch any signs of movement. A soft breeze whispered through the trees. Wisteria broke the silence. It didn't like you writing on the wall. I chuckled quietly, which I immediately regretted. It hurt. I pushed up my shirt sleeve to reveal a huge bruise on my upper arm that was already starting to turn purple and black. I poked it gingerly and winced. Not a great idea. How did you get that? Wisteria asked in awe. I, clipped the door frame. Full speed. I was running out of the living room, I said. I could feel myself blushing hotly. Did you get out the front door? She asked, giving my bruise a poke. Ow, stop. I pulled away. No, I jumped out a window. Let's just go, please. Brock unlocked the truck and we piled in. We had driven several aimless miles out into the country before any of us felt safe enough to speak. It wasn't a ghost. I said. It could have been anything. Brock laughed. Who are you trying to convince? You're the one who jumped out the window to get away from it. I smiled weakly. Wisteria was bouncing in her seat. It sounded like an old, scratchy vinyl record. I get tons of them from thrift stores. Only it didn't sound like it was coming from anywhere, Brock said. It sounded like it was inside my head. It could have been a creaky board that one of us, stepped on. A long, slow creak. I didn't sound too convincing. You know, you get inside these old places, imagination goes wild. You hear what you expect to hear. You believe that? Wisteria said. Really? Could have been a squatter. They think of the places they live in as theirs, their property, their house. They don't like trespassers. It's just so weird that we didn't hear anything until you started writing on the wall, Wisteria mused. I'm not saying it's not weird. I'm just saying that just because we can't explain it. Oh, come on, Wisteria said. We heard something supernatural. It doesn't mean the best explanation is ghosts. I'm saying it rocked, said Brock. I think we should go back. I want to write more stuff on the walls and see what happens. Wisteria was getting very animated. We should go to the library, or the county clerk. We can do some research and find out who used to live there. Maybe there was a murder, added Brock. Sounds like fun, I said. Wisteria looked at me with those big eyes. Are you being facetious? No, actually, I think we should do it. Brock, can we? She pleaded. She sounded like a little girl pestering her dad. Please? Oh, all right, you crazy kids, said Brock. Wisteria reached behind my back and tousled his hair, giggling. He glanced to the strapless digital watch that he had taped on the dashboard when the car's LCD display stopped working. Except it's after 5, and the library is closed. Wisteria groaned. I didn't know it was so late. I gotta get back home before my dad freaks out. He'll call the police, and then you guys will get into a mistaken hostage situation, and wacky hijinks will ensue. Brock pointed the truck back toward North Broadacre. We drove on in silence for a while, each processing our own thoughts, but keeping the conclusions to ourselves. Soon we were back in the sparkling commercial district. Grab this parking spot, Wisteria said, waggling her finger at a space on the corner near the first bank of North Broadacre. Where's your house? I asked her as Brock shut off the engine. It's above the bank. Wisteria pulled on her long, white gloves and hopped out of the truck. We followed sheepishly. I don't think we were quite sure what to do next, but I was really hoping that she would invite us in. The impulse to see the insides of these buildings was overwhelming. Wisteria noticed us waiting patiently with silly grins as she lifted her bike out of the truck bed. You guys probably shouldn't come up, she said firmly. You look like hell. Ah, it's just a little dirt, Brock said as he made a futile attempt to brush it off. I suddenly became self-conscious and tried to comb down my unruly hair with my fingers. And nasty bloody cuts, and ripped clothes. When my dad sees you guys, he'll want to know what happened. And then we'll have to tell him the whole story, and I really don't want him to know the whole story. My dad's a little conservative. She pulled her sketchbook from the trunk and walked slowly backward toward the bank. So, when are we going to the library? Brock asked. This week. I'll come find you. How are you planning to do that? I said. We didn't tell you where we live. Wisteria bit her lip. I have my ways of finding people. You'll see. With a short wave, she turned and walked toward an alcove near the bank entrance. Inside, a narrow set of stairs leading up to the second floor was dimly visible. Wait, what? I said. Wisteria smiled and disappeared. Brock and I looked at each other. The sound of a mother calling her child to dinner floated above the buildings. A couple, walking arm in arm, entered the pizzeria next door. You think we'll really see her again? Brock asked. Nope, I think that was a don't call me, I'll call you type of moment. Brock shrugged. Well, anyways, we'd better get started if we're going to do any cleaning today. We climbed back into the truck and headed out. On the way back to the late Mrs. Glazer's house, I told Brock about the weird journey that my imagination had taken while we were in the farmhouse. He listened quietly as I recounted everything I could remember. Blood on the dress, the family, some kind of problem with the daughter, the father who didn't want to face reality. So, what you're telling me is that you had a vision? He asked. I wouldn't call it that. Did you actually see this stuff, like in the room with you? No, I saw it in my mind's eye, I guess. It just seemed so realistic, you know? Detailed. Where did it come from? Well, like you said yourself, your imagination goes wild in a place like that. I thought for a moment. Even if Wisteria doesn't show up, we still need to find out what, if anything, happened in that house. Like if a farmer killed his daughter in there for some reason? Uh-huh. And we can solve the 100-year-old mystery of why he did it. Put the daughter's spirit to rest? Yeah. We passed a farmer cutting rows into a field with his tractor in preparation for planting. Maybe he got sick of looking at corn all day, every day, and went crazy. I wouldn't blame him, Brock said. I laughed. We sped on.